All right, welcome back everybody to session number 3 of Dining with Diabetes. This week we're going to be covering fats and sodium. Just in case you weren't here for the first 2 sessions, or for some reason if you're watching this recording later, you started with this one. My name is Mandy Broderick. I'm the Lewis County Extension Agent for Family and Consumer Sciences, and I'm co-teaching this course with Olivia Ferris, the Lawrence County Extension Agent for Family and Consumer Sciences. So we both work for the University of Kentucky. So like I said, this is session number 3, and we are going to be covering fats and sodium. So this is one of the things that when we think of unhealthy foods, these are usually 2 of the big things that pop up, right? Like obviously calories are really important, and maybe some people don't think about fats and sodium a lot, but we really should be, because they definitely contribute a lot to what makes a food unhealthy. So people with diabetes are actually more likely to die from cardiac arrest, so following a heart-healthy diet is especially important. All right, so a little bit of review, kind of going to surprise you here with this. So what did you notice more this week as a result of our classes last week? So was there anything that you improved on, anything that you maybe thought about more when you were selecting different foods? You can go ahead and type in the chat box if you want. How to divide my plate. So that's a really good one. Last week, that's actually a question on down the list here. So I'll go ahead and ask that. So how much of your plate should be vegetables? Does anyone remember? Okay, so Joe says paying more attention to my plate. So that's great. Half. Yes, you got it. So half of your plate, like like Olivia mentioned last week, should be those non-starchy vegetables. Can any of you name a food that adds carbs to your diet? Okay, Rhonda says, I chose more non-starchy vegetables for my plate, so that's awesome. That's awesome. I know the starchy vegetables tend to be my favorite, so I have to be really careful that I'm not only eating those. Potatoes, yes. Potatoes, that's definitely a big food that adds carbs to your diet. Tomatoes. Okay, anybody else? Carrots. Beans, like kidney, yes. Those are big ones. And like I said, I'm really bad. I always want to eat those starchy veggies. All right, now at the end of each class, we've been asking you all to set a SMART goal, right? So have any of you set a goal that you've been working towards since this class began? This is the last question. I know I'm giving you a little pop quiz here. A little more exercise daily. Ooh, that's good. Oh, I see another one here. Keeping my exercise going and my carbs lower. That's awesome. You sound like you've been doing really good, which is, awesome. That is awesome. All right, pop quiz is over. So you need to remember that managing diabetes is really a balancing act. So making sure that you get enough carbohydrates, calories, vitamins, minerals, and fiber while limiting harmful fats, it's definitely not easy. On top of that, you're going to be balancing meals, you're going to be balancing your physical activity, and your medications. It can be quite a challenge. So meal plans that are written with a healthcare professional can help you balance all these things. If you don't have a meal plan that works for you, you can honestly talk to your doctor and they would probably be more than happy to help you write one. Increasing physical activity. I know a couple of you said in the chat here earlier that you were actually working towards exercising more, and that's amazing. But increasing that physical activity is definitely important, not just for people with diabetes, but for everybody. So with increased physical activity, people with diabetes are able to lower their blood sugar. A lot of people with diabetes also need special medications or pills, or maybe even insulin. So these medications need to be carefully matched with food in order to avoid very high or very low blood sugars. And once again, that's something that we won't be able to specifically help you with. You definitely need to talk to a doctor about that. Meal planning. So this is a bit of a review from last week in case, you're kind of fuzzy on it or maybe you've forgotten some things. So last week, Olivia actually talked about meal planning, specifically about carbohydrates. Okay, the pop quiz isn't over. Does anyone remember how many carbs are in a serving? So I'm looking for how many grams specifically. This is a pretty tough question. I'll be impressed. 15. Oh, Rhonda got it. Okay, 2 of you got it. That's amazing. That's amazing. All right, let me make it a little tougher. So how many grams of carbohydrates should you eat at each meal? Does anyone remember that? That one's a little harder. Ooh, 30. You're really close, Joe. You're really close. 15. That's how many is in one serving. So with each meal, you should have 45 to 60 grams. You all were really close. So that's 3 to 4 servings of carbs per meal, as long as they're appropriately sized. So if you look at the graphic here, that's like 1 3-ounce deck of cards. That's 3 ounces of chicken. This is the size of like a deck of cards. 1 cup of cooked rice. That's going to be about the size of a tennis ball. 1 ounce of cheese, about the size of a domino. And you all can look at the rest of these. So this week, instead of talking about carbs specifically, we're actually going to be talking about fats and sodium. So learning about where the fat and the salt goes into our food and how we can cut that back is really important for making healthy food choices. Let's see here. I can only have about 30 carbs for any meal and 15 for a snack. Oh, that's fine, Janie. Well, like I said earlier, different people are going to have different things they have to do. But yeah, that's great. Great point. Know what your body, yeah, absolutely. Do what works for your body. Those rules are not hard and fast. So another little bit of a review from week 1. So high blood glucose, or A1C, high blood pressure, and high cholesterol can affect multiple sites in the body, including your brain, eyes, heart, kidneys, and feet. So researchers actually believe that high blood glucose, high cholesterol, and high blood pressure in people with diabetes can cause changes in blood vessels that increase the risk for all the above complications. So something that Olivia said last week that I've never heard anyone say before, but I actually really liked it. So whenever you're eating a food, think about you take your roast out of the oven, right? It's got all that fat. You let it sit out a while, it cools down. There's those solid fat pieces. What she said last week is if it's solid when it cools down, outside of your body, it's solid inside you in your body, right? So all those fats that you're eating, they solidify in your arteries. So that's why it's really important to make sure we're not eating too much of that fat. Researchers also believe that high blood glucose, high cholesterol, and high blood pressure cause changes in the blood vessels, and it also gives you a higher rate of heart disease, stroke, kidney disease, and nerve problems. And all these things, unfortunately, most of the time lead to amputations, which is obviously something that we definitely want to avoid. So 3/4 of people with diabetes also die from some sort of heart or blood vessel disease. That's why it's especially important to control all these different factors. Some other things you can do include lowering the amount of fat and salt in your diet and choosing the healthiest types of foods possible. And we're going to talk more about how you can limit that fat and salt and what, more healthy foods are here later in the presentation. So kind of going back to that fat hardening in your arteries, this is a visual of that. So on the left here, we have a healthy coronary artery. You can see, it's nice and open. Any blood that flows through that is going to have a really easy time getting where it needs to go. And then you have the problem child here on the right. So that's a coronary artery with plaque buildup. So once again, over time, if you keep eating these fatty foods, it's going to solidify in your arteries. It's going to lead to stroke, heart attack, or maybe even worse. Okay, so let's go ahead and get really into fats here. So fats, let's back up a little bit. So heart healthy eating includes actually eating only saturated fats and cholesterol. Now, cutting down saturated fats and cholesterol. Now notice I only said saturated fats. That's because there are 2 different types of fats. Can anybody put in the chat box what the 2 different types of fats are? I'll kind of keep peeking over there. So some people, they actually eat too many foods with this cholesterol and they get too much in their body. So foods that are high in cholesterol and saturated fats include things like animal foods. So think like your big juicy hamburgers, your steaks, anything like that really. Your eggs, your cheese, your high fat dairy products. So when I say high fat dairy, I'm talking like your whole milk, for example, or maybe even something like ice cream, right? Like that's a dairy product, but it's definitely high in fat and sugar. Heart healthy eating actually suggests that eating less foods with saturated fats is going to help you live a healthier life. All right, so let's get back to saturated fat. So saturated, let's see here, side note, do not put raw meat and veggies on the same cutting board at the same time. That's right, Olivia. So we also teach a lot of food safety, so that is a very good point. That picture is definitely not the best. I wouldn't have even noticed that. But yes, do not put your raw meats and your raw veggies on the same cutting board. Wow.
Just my little disclaimer for food safety for the day.
I wouldn't have even, which we didn't make this PowerPoint. I wouldn't have even noticed that. That's fun. That's kind of crazy that that's like that.
That's funny.
That is
Yeah,
funny.
so
Good
there's
catch.
your extra lesson for the day.
Yeah. So saturated fat is it actually has to do with the chemical structure. So the difference in saturated fat and unsaturated has to do with literally the way the molecules are bound inside that food, right? So saturated fats, they're usually firm or they hold their shape at room temperature. So I don't know about you, but the first thing my head went to was like lard, right? So that is probably one of the best examples of saturated fat that I can think of. It's solid, it holds its shape at room temperature. So also meats that have any kind of marbling in them. So your steaks, your big T-bones, your hamburgers, any kind of marbling, even though that makes your food taste better, it's going to be adding saturated fat. So the fat in most red meat is saturated. In red meat, it's usually more saturated than in meats such as chicken, turkey, and fish. Something else you can do if you're at the store, I know I try to do this. If you're buying hamburger, try to buy the leanest cut of the meat that you can. That's going to help cut down on some of that saturated fat. Something else specifically about poultry, make sure you're trying to remove the skin from that. The skin in chicken actually has a lot of saturated fat as well. So let's move on to trans fats. So trans fats or trans fatty acids are formed when vegetables oils are made into margarine or shortening. So butter, right? I don't know about you all, but I love my butter. Trans fats are found in foods made with partially hydrogenated vegetable oil or vegetable shortening. Trans fats are also occur naturally in small quantities in animal products such as beef, pork, butter, and milk. So whenever you eat these, whenever you put them into your body, trans fats, they act just like saturated fat, okay? And they're going to raise your blood cholesterol levels. So even though they aren't naturally occurring fats, they are still going to be processed the same way in your body as those naturally occurring saturated fats. So they're both bad for you. All right. Any questions on that? I know that's kind of a lot. So just think saturated fat, trans fat are both bad. That's the takeaway from this slide. I'm still cracking up about that chicken next to the lettuce. That's all I can see now. All right. So not all fats are created equal, in case you can't already tell. So monounsaturated fatty acids may actually help lower your LDL cholesterol levels and decrease your risk of heart disease. So remember, the LDL cholesterol levels, those are the ones that are bad. We don't want those numbers to be high. So olive oil, canola oil, certain nuts like almonds, walnuts, peanuts, all these different things are good sources of special fats, and you should really choose these whenever possible when you're cooking. So great example here on the slide, you got your peanuts, peanut oil. I know I have most of these oils in my cabinet. My personal favorite is canola. I also like olive. I think peanut kind of has a different taste, but it's okay. Yeah. And peanuts, almonds, and walnuts, those are also great snacks. Okay, so just to kind of reiterate, right? Unsaturated fats, you want to love those. So those are going to lower your rates of cardiovascular and mortality. They're going to lower your bad cholesterol, your LDL, and your triglycerides, and they're going to provide essential fat for your body that your body can't produce for itself. So that's actually something I should mention. You shouldn't aim to cut out all fat from your diet. Your body does need some fat to survive, right? That's actually something I hear a lot of people, when they say they'll go on a diet, they're like, oh, I cut out carbs. Well, that might be great and all, but I can also almost promise you that their blood sugar levels are all over the place and they probably don't feel the best. Even if you're a diabetic, right? You need carbs to survive. Even if you're a diabetic, and really for anybody, you need some fat to survive for your body to function normal. So whenever you're trying to choose your foods, you want these unsaturated fats. They have an avocado on there. That's an example I hadn't said before. That's a great source of a healthy fat. I know I love avocados. Some fats that you want to limit include saturated fats. So that's again that butter, the margarine, the cream, all that stuff. And then we have the things that we should really avoid, right? So that's going to be your trans fat, your hydrogenated oils, and your tropical oils. I don't know about you, but that's all the good stuff over there, right? So you've got your donuts, your coconut oil. A lot of people are usually they're usually surprised to see coconut oil over there. We've been kind of tricked to think that it's really healthy for you, but it actually has a ton of trans fat in it and hydrogenated fats. So those fats increase the risk of heart disease and they raise your blood cholesterol level. All right, so please remember that all fats are high. Margarine is listed here as a trans fat example. However, it is not our first choice in fats. Exactly, Olivia. Exactly. So like for healthy fats, obviously our first choices are going to be things like avocados, those peanuts, the tree nuts, things like that, right? All right.
Something that I've heard before, back when I was in my undergrad, if it comes from a plant, it's usually one of our first choices. Whereas if it comes from an animal-based, like lard is what I always think about, or like bacon grease. While sometimes those taste good, those are usually the ones that are, the hardest on our arteries and our overall health, particularly our cardiovascular system.
Right.
So
Right. That's a great
it
point.
was just used here as an example of trans fat, which I think in that last slide from the American Heart Association, it was listed as one that we limit.
I think so. Yeah, it was under limit. It was under limit. But that, of course, doesn't mean, don't go crazy. Don't be eating half a stick of butter just because, it says to limit it. It's okay to have a little bit, but definitely be leaning more towards that love it side there. All right. So, all fats, okay, this is probably another really important takeaway. All fats, even the healthy ones, are still high in calories. I don't know about you, but like I've been on a diet a couple times, right? And I always, I reach for something like an almond or a peanut, like a healthy snack, right? So even though those are healthy fats, those still have a ton of calories and you still have to be careful. Just because almonds are healthy doesn't mean you can eat the whole bag of almonds. You're still eating all those calories. What about the new plant margarines that are on the market? Helen, I actually don't know too much about those. Um, Olivia, do you care to maybe look that up and see if you can get some answers on that? I personally haven't seen them. Sure. Okay. Awesome. Thank you. You're such a good helper. But yeah, all fats, absolutely all of them are high in calories. So don't sit down and eat that whole bag of almonds just because it has healthy fat in it. So we're going to play a fun little game now, actually. Can anyone guess how much fat is in 1 tablespoon of butter? This might surprise you. Just take a guess. You don't have to be right. 15 grams. Ooh, Janie's guessing high. You're honestly not that far off. Anyone else? 10? 10? Oh, you're even closer now. You're even closer now. 8. Okay, we got an 8 from Adriana. Okay, so there's actually 11 and a half. So Janie, you were really, really close. And just 1 tablespoon of butter, oil, or lard, okay? And I know you're thinking, think about like, your blocks of your butter, right? 1 tablespoon, so one little tick over is 11 and a half grams of fat or 100 calories, right? So, honestly, a tablespoon isn't a lot. So think about something else that we usually overeat of, peanut butter, right? I don't know about you all, but when I go to make a peanut butter sandwich, I absolutely load that bread down with peanut butter, right? It tastes good. I want more of it. Peanut butter is definitely good for you, but you need to be careful because just like that, just like your butter, it's got a ton of fat in it. So 1 tablespoon of peanut butter, for example, is actually just the distance. Those that are on the recording won't be able to see me, but that's just the distance from the tip of your pinky or your tip of your thumb right here, right, to your knuckle. That's 1 tablespoon of peanut butter, that little bit of an amount. I don't know about you all, but do you only use 1 tablespoon of peanut butter when you make a peanut butter sandwich? I know I don't. It's not very much. So even though these things are healthy fats, you still have to be really careful not to overdo it. All right, the nutrition facts label for foods lists the amount of total fat near the top of the label. And you need to be sure to look and compare the amount of saturated fat in spreads, cheeses, and meats. So if you look at these nutrition labels here, it's actually right there below the calories, right? So up at the top, you've got calories, 230. Down below that, you have your total fat, 8 grams. And you can actually see it's even broken down further than that. So it's got your saturated fat, which is 1 gram, and your trans fat, right? Let's see, I started measuring out my peanut butter before I put it on celery, for example, and that's it. Yes, Joe, that's really about how you have to do it. It really is. Something else I do, actually, have you ever tried the powdered peanut butter? It's actually much lower in fat, but still has a ton of protein in it. So I actually use that a lot. I wouldn't eat it on a sandwich, but if you're eating it with like apples or something, you really can't tell the difference in taste at all. But yeah, peanut butter is the one thing that I always overdo. So labels for spreads, oils, and shortenings also list the amount of polyunsaturated, monounsaturated, and trans fats. If a label does not list these, what you can do is just subtract the saturated fat from the total fat to find the total grams of healthy fats. So in case that's kind of confusing to you, right? So let's say that your label says, the example on the left here, total fat, 6.5 grams. All right. And then let's say that it only tells you that there's 2.5 grams of saturated fat, right? So you can subtract that, and that's the amount of healthy fat in that product. I have some answers on butter for us. Okay, Olivia, do you want to unmute and tell us what you found out about the plant-based butter?
Sure thing. I actually learned something today. Okay, so the major difference between butter and margarine is butter is animal-based and margarine is actually plant-based.
Mm-hmm.
Now, something very interesting is the plant butter spreads is kind of new marketing.
Oh,
So yes, so years ago, and there still is kind of a debate. I found this really interesting. People there was an article that came out that talked about the molecular content of margarine, so all the way down to the molecule. And they found that in some plastics and in some margarine, they share some molecules.
oh yeah, I've heard that before.
However, this is the same as saying that, different plants share molecules. So, and we probably actually share some, humans are very carbon based and lots of things are carbon based. So that's kind of saying that humans are the same thing as carbon.
So basically, like those plant-based, you're just saying it's like marketing because they were already made from plants.
Yes.
Okay.
So they have rebranded margarine and added like plants on the labels and green lids and tried to make it look more natural
Okay.
because they got a lot of bad publicity from these articles that came out about plastic.
Yeah.
So essentially, the plant butters that you're eating today are almost the exact same thing as spreadable margarine
It's just a
from
marketing
yesterday.
thing. See, which I haven't paid attention, right? Because I don't use a ton of butter or margarine. But that's crazy.
Now, there are some new flavors out there now and some other sources, like olive oil is really popular right now. So you see a lot of things that say with olive oil,
Hmm.
where maybe in years past it was with canola oil or sunflower oil. So
Okay.
that has changed. But the biggest difference they said is really just how the companies came back to the drawing board and remarketed the same product.
Well, I
Um,
learned something today too, because like I said, I hadn't even seen that in the store, but then again, I hadn't paid attention. So it's just a marketing thing.
yeah.
You find that a lot. You really do find that a lot. But the plastic thing, I'd actually forgotten about it, but I do remember I had a chemistry professor during a class in my undergrad, and that I remember her talking about that organic chemistry, how margarine, it's one molecular bond, one molecular
Away.
chemical bond away from being a plastic. Yes.
Yes.
I had forgotten
And
about that.
that's a good point too, as being classified as a plastic. It doesn't mean that it'll suddenly turn into like a water bottle or something. It's
Yeah.
just,
It just means that
yeah.
their chemical makeup is very similar. So they're made of the same same elements pretty much.
But
Yeah.
something else I want to make sure I said here too is do whatever your doctor has told you to do. So if they say, hey, you need to be eating margarine or you need to be eating butter or you need to be eating olive oil or whatever, again, Mandy and I are not doctors. We can just kind of point you
Right.
in the right direction to live a more well balanced lifestyle. you know your body, your doctor knows your body. Make sure you're following their recommendations. But I
Exactly.
thought that was very fascinating that it's
Yeah.
pretty much the same thing
Yeah,
as
look,
margarine.
even we learned something today.
Yes. And something else I'll note too, they said different brands, and this is with anything, have different structures, different, even different offerings of what they add to it. So that again is why another example of why your food label is very, very important, because we should be aware of what we're putting into our body. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So, like, let's say, right, we've been saying that not all fats are bad, but you should still be paying attention, right? So, how do we incorporate this into our everyday lives? Okay. So, what we're going to start talking about now is how to make healthy substitutions while we're cooking. So, you can strive to make low fat choices. An example of this would be using evaporated skim milk in place of whole milk, or using half and half cream in a cream soup. Those are a couple of really good examples. A lot of people use fruit purees and fruit juices to replace fats in packaged products. So I know we have a recipe that we use a lot in Extension. It's actually like a box of cake mix and pumpkin. So instead of having, like, the eggs and the oil, it's just the pumpkin. It substitutes for both. And it's actually pretty good. Still high in sugar though. um, Another example, like if a recipe maybe calls for a cup of oil, you could add in like half a cup of applesauce. I've also heard of people using a banana, like mashed banana, to do that. So be sure to read the label on fruit purees and fat-free baking products to see how much carbs are needed in the recipe. Now, oops, sorry. I'm trying to scroll through my notes and I scrolled off the slide. There we go. We're back. All right. So depending on the product, the amount of fat, so like butter, margarine, or oil, can actually usually be cut down by a third. So in convenience foods, half of the fat can be cut with little or no decrease in product quality. So you're probably wondering, if they don't need the fat, why are they putting it in there, right? I don't know. You tell me. I think they know that we're addicted to it, so they just, they put it in there. Sometimes it might be like a preservative thing. I'm not sure. But something you can try at home if you're cooking, just try adding less oil or just try adding slightly less butter. And usually you won't be able to even tell the difference. You can also choose healthier fats. So oils can be substituted for butter or margarine in most recipes. And the fat in oils is less saturated and contains no cholesterol. Now, yesterday, I actually sent everyone here a handout on substituting recipes. Now, we are going to be going over that here in detail. So, that handout actually talks about how to modify recipes. So, I mentioned a few of them on the last slide, but we're really going to get more in detail here. So, let's see here. Recipe suggestion. So, spreading butter or shortening on a pan to avoid sticking. So, instead of using butter or shortening, maybe you could brush it with oil. I know I do that a lot. I'll I can't even talk now. I will pour out a little bit of canola oil into like my dish, and I'll use a paper towel and I'll just kind of move it around the dish. And that's how I use that instead of shortening. You can also use nonstick cooking spray. I use that a lot. Cream soups, like you could use pureed veggies for thickening. I don't think I've ever done that. I can't really think of a time where I've ever used a pureed veggie. Cream cheese. So instead of cream cheese, you can use non-fat or low-fat option, and you can also use pureed cottage cheese. Now, something, I don't know if it's on here. Let me look real quick. Okay, it's not. This is actually one of my favorite substitutions, okay? It's really good, I promise. So instead of using sour cream, you can use non-fat Greek yogurt. And I know you're thinking yogurt, because, I use sour cream a lot, like on my tacos, on my taco salads. But here's the thing, sour cream, it's fattening. But that non-fat Greek yogurt, I know it sounds gross to put yogurt on Mexican food, but I'm telling you, it tastes just like sour cream. Like if you go and you mix it around, like you can't even tell the difference. Okay, so try that. Plain, not vanilla. Yes, plain, non-fat Greek yogurt. If you use vanilla, you are definitely going to tell it's yogurt. But it has kind of like that, I don't know, sour? I don't think that's the right word, but sour is the closest thing I can think to. It has a very similar flavor, so give that a try. Sugar. So to modify sugar in a recipe, you could actually cut it down by half. So for an example of this, ratio 1/4 cup of sugar to 1 cup fourth of flour. If a recipe calls for sugar, I mentioned this earlier. You can use the unsweetened applesauce. I've also heard of people using banana before. I've never tried banana, but I have used applesauce. And you can reduce the liquid in the recipe by a fourth cup. So the reason it's giving you these ratios, right, is because whenever you start substituting, like, for example, applesauce for sugar or one oil for another, it's going to change the consistency a little bit. So you have to kind of adjust. But usually, it also sometimes will change the flavor. I know, like, if I make, for example, like a muffin or a cupcake with applesauce, it usually has like a different taste. It's not necessarily a bad taste, but it is different. Let's keep going here. So all-purpose flour, you can blend half white flour with half whole wheat flour. Word of advice, it's great to incorporate that whole wheat flour into your cooking. Do not completely substitute whole wheat flour, right? If you do, you're going to regret it. I did that once. It comes out very gritty and grainy. My personal recommendation is just exactly what it says here. If you want to incorporate that whole wheat flour, right, do half and half. Don't go totally whole wheat flour. It will not be edible. If the recipe calls for chicken or beef broth, you can do a reduced sodium option. So I know when I go to the store, I just kind of look for like no salt added or low sodium. I don't think it tastes any different. I truly don't. So also remember that patience is key. Don't be discouraged if a recipe, I kind of said this earlier, doesn't taste exactly the same. It's great to try and reduce those fats, reduce the sodium, all that stuff. It might taste a little different, but really just kind of take a moment to yourself and say, yes, this tastes different, but does it taste bad? And usually the answer is no. It's just different, right? So you're not used to it. You also might just need to try again. So that's kind of like my example with with the whole wheat flour. What was I making? I think they were like little muffins. They were terrible. They were absolutely terrible. I threw them away, right? But that doesn't mean that I stopped cooking with whole wheat flour. I was just kind of like, okay, half and half from now on. Sometimes you live and you learn. Allow children or grandchildren especially to get involved with making changes to the recipes. So this is actually something that we teach people a lot in other programs that we do with Extension. Kids, especially if they're picky eaters, right? If you let them help prepare food, they kind of feel like they've invested in that, right? And it gets them excited about it. So let's say you're making a smoothie and you let them, I don't know, you let them measure out the blueberries and dump it in the blender. That gets them excited because they feel like they helped and they made it, and they're more likely to try it, even if they're picky. So that's a neat little trick there. So this is another pop quiz question. I'm quizzing you all a lot today. What are 2 steps that you can take to improve the nutrition of your family recipes? So that could be, well, I won't give you an example because that'd be cheating. I want to see what you come up with first. Oh, let's see what I've missed here. Have too many zucchini. Zucchini puree is a good choice. It works like applesauce. I would have never thought to use zucchini. Does the texture of that not come out too watery? I guess it wouldn't be much different than applesauce, though. So just once
Yeah,
again,
and if you've ever made zucchini bread before, you've probably pureed zucchini, but it can work really similar to applesauce. And a good thing about zucchini is it takes on whatever flavor, especially if you make zucchini bread, if you put cinnamon in there, you're going to taste the cinnamon. So it
yeah.
takes on whatever flavor is like one of the main spices or ingredients. So I've used pureed zucchini before. It is harder to trick kids because sometimes a little bit of those green skins get in there.
You know what that makes me
But
think of?
I know that's yeah.
We had one recipe, this is just totally random, that was on our nutrition calendar. Every year we have like a nutrition calendar with different recipes each month. And one year we had like a yellow squash macaroni one. Do you remember that?
Yes, I remember that. I
Yeah,
do.
that one,
Yeah.
I swear, it had like a bunch of yellow squash in it, and it looked and tasted just like normal macaroni and cheese. It was
Like mac and
crazy.
cheese. It
Yeah,
did.
yeah. Oh, we have some answers over here too. Substitute applesauce for sugar in a recipe. Absolutely. Use low sodium chicken broth as a substitute for regular. Right. And like I kind of said, I just automatically buy low salt, sodium things at the store. I've just gotten to the habit. I can't taste the difference. All right, so just a few more examples, things that you could do to improve the nutrition of the recipes you already have. Get rid of an unhealthy ingredient. So let's say you have, lard coating your pan. Get rid of the lard and use cooking spray, canola oil instead. You can enhance the nutrition. So you could maybe, instead of using all white flour, you could use half white, half whole wheat, right? Reduce the overall amount of an unhealthy ingredient. Remember how I kind of said you can usually cut back like a third of your fat or your salt and you won't even taste the difference? Try that, see if it works. You can also modify the cooking method. So the first thing that I thought of here was like those new air fryers. So like, instead of using your lard and frying something up, maybe, air fry it. That'd be an example. And portion control. Now, this is important for everything. Make sure that you're not overeating, right? Olivia last week talked about how we have the 12-inch dinner plates now. The recommendations are based on an 8-inch plate. Don't overdo your portions. All right, so that's everything I had to say about fat. Now let's go ahead and talk about, let's see. We'll have to try and use the zucchini puree, use low sodium broth instead of oil. Yes, exactly. My favorite time to use the zucchini puree is in muffins. Okay, you need to make me some sometime, Olivia. I want to try these zucchini muffins. I do. But we're moving on from fat now, and we're going to talk more about sodium. All right. So your body, just like fat, right? It needs salt to survive. You shouldn't just go totally zero salt, right? Just like you shouldn't go totally zero carbs, totally zero fat. Your body needs these things to survive, right? That's just how it is. But most of us get way too much salt, and I mean way too much. So US guidelines actually call for less than 2,300 milligrams per day, which isn't a lot. Does anyone have a guess for how much salt is 2,300 milligrams? It's not a lot. It's less than what you think. I'll actually go ahead and tell you. It's only 1 teaspoon of salt. You only need 1 teaspoon of salt a day. That's just crazy to me to think about. So you actually may be surprised by some of the foods that you're eating. They might be high in sodium. And something else I'll say about this is something that at our local health department, one of the RNs, she does a diabetes class, and this is something she always tells them. Usually if a food looks too good to be true, it is, right? So like if it says it's fat-free, 9 times out of 10, they've added something else into that food, right? So if it's fat-free, it's usually super high in sugar because they've loaded it down. If it's no sodium added, it usually has fat in it to make it taste better. So 9 times out of 10, if they're taking something out, they're adding something back in, right? So sometimes you're honestly better off just buying the normal product. But a lot of foods that you think are healthy are going to surprise you, right? So most salt, I know I think about like salt shakers on a table. If it's sitting there in front of you, you're going to add a little bit of salt, right? But most of it isn't salt that's added. It's actually things that are already in your foods. So think about condiments, right? I know ketchup particularly has a ton of sugar. Did you all know that? When's the last time you looked at a ketchup bottle? Dressings, they can have a lot of salt. Packaged foods. I know one packaged food that I think of is like the frozen TV meals, right? Or like the ready-to-eat meals. Those are usually super high in salt. Restaurant foods are really bad about salt. So according to the American Diabetes Association, hidden salt is usually the biggest source of sodium in our meal. Hidden salt, it's going to be found in fast food, restaurant food, canned foods. There's so many companies who are trying to help consumers cut down on the amount of salt in the diet by offering no salt added products. But remember, while that's great, it's usually going to have something else added into it, like more fat, for example. So some people with high blood pressure are very sensitive to large amounts of salt in their diets. 1 teaspoon of salt, once again, has 2,400 milligrams of sodium. 1 teaspoon is your entire daily recommended value. So a meal plan that's moderate in sodium might have 2,300 milligrams of sodium, or it might have less, right? So if you work with your doctor to establish that meal plan, let's say you know you have heart issues and you want to eat a heart-healthy diet and you have that sodium even lower, right? It's going to differ for every single person. For individuals with diabetes and hypertension, reducing the sodium below even that 2,300 milligrams, you should definitely talk to your doctor. Like I said, that's usually something that they've told you to do. But you do need some salt to survive, so you're not going to want to ever cut all of it out. Okay, so where can we find sodium or salt on a food label, right? So look at the portion of the label that tells you how much sodium is in the food. So if you look at this label here, you've got your calories for 230, your total fat for 8, cholesterol 0, and then there's the sodium, 160 milligrams. Now remember, you only need that 2,300 a day. So whenever you're choosing foods, you want to make sure they're not loaded down with salts. And a lot of times these foods are loaded down with salt, to help preserve them, is the truth. This food here, it actually has 160 grams of sodium. That alone is 14% of your daily value. That alone is 14%. It doesn't say what this is. I'm trying to figure out 230 calories, 8 servings per container. Yeah, I don't know. I have no clue what that is. But yeah, that alone is 14% of your daily value. So it does not take long to hit that 2,300 milligrams. Salt substitutes. So we gave tons of examples for how you can substitute fats, right? Now, salts are a little more tricky. So you need to be really careful because some substitutes made from like potassium chloride, those can actually be really dangerous for some people. So people who have kidney disease or people who are taking drugs for high blood pressure or congestive heart failure, those potassium chloride salt substitutes can actually kill them, right? So you need to be very careful when you're messing with salt. Make sure you're always reading labels. Another alternative, and this is actually, my personal recommendation over a salt substitute. Another alternative to using salt in your cooking is to use herbs and spices, right? So herbs and spices do not add any calories to your diet, right, or to your food, but they're actually going to add a ton of flavor. So it's a win-win, right? Now, something important to note when I say use herbs and spices, because I immediately start thinking about what I have in my cabinet, right? I know I have like garlic salt, right? That's obviously not going to accomplish your goal. That has salt in it. Now, if you use just garlic powder, it's going to add flavor without adding salt. So make sure you're not using things, or like chili powder, right? Chili powder is a great, low-fat seasoning. It's going to add or flavor to your food, but it's got salt in it. So make sure, you're not using pre-blended things that are going to have salt. Oh, let's see what I've missed here. When I cut out processed foods, my sodium actually dropped to low since I stopped adding it to food and most food, and I had to add it back in. Yeah, Joe. A lot of people, they get their most people think it's like you're dumping the salt on, but that's not the truth. Most of those processed foods is where people are getting their salt from. And it can be dangerous. If you totally cut out salt, like it can be very dangerous, very, very dangerous. So just some examples, right? Because I was talking about like the herbs and spices, or really some recommendations. So use small amounts of fresh or dried herbs. I know I'm the world's worst about not measuring my spices, and then it never fails. You add way too much and you're like, wow, that is very garlicky. I'm sure I'm not the only one. So make sure when you're using something, especially for the first time, that you use a small amount of it. You can always add more in at the end, but you can't take it back out, right? You can't take it back out. When adding something to foods, start with a small amount. So just like a 1/4 teaspoon per 4 servings. You can always increase the quantity if you want. So dried herbs are actually 2 to 3 times more strong than fresh. So that's going to be the stuff, you buy at the store on the shelf, like I think like my Italian seasoning, right? That, because it's dried, it's 2 to 3 times more strong than a fresh herb. Now, that being said, because it is dehydrated, it's better to add those at the beginning of when you cook, right? Because it takes a little bit of heat and time for those flavors to really activate in your food. So adding those at the beginning are better. Whereas like with your fresh herbs and spices, you want to add those at the end. Those are fresh. They're delicate, right? Think about a flower, right? Sun's great for it, but if it gets too hot, it's going to wilt. Same thing with your spices. You don't want them to overheat, but you also do want to, get those flavors from it. So add those at the end, the fresh ones. You can also use an herb mixture. So like Mrs. Dash, that's a good example. Some herb mixtures are really spicy and flavorful, and they actually don't have any salt. So start with tiny amounts to make sure you get the taste that you like. Be sure to read labels carefully. Shoot, I did it again, clicked off. Be sure to read labels really careful whenever you're buying things for the first time. So I gave the example of garlic salt, right? That would be an example of, oh great, you're trying to reduce the salt that you add by adding the garlic flavor. But garlic salt has salt in it, so you're kind of ruining it for yourself. So make sure you're paying attention to those labels. All right, and probably one of the most important things that you can remember, right, is that it's all in your head. It really is all in your head. So a lot of us, maybe we've grown up eating certain foods. Maybe we've grown up eating those salty fries from the fast food restaurant, or those really fat, like fried foods. It's all in your head though. Today you can change it. You can start getting into a new healthy habit. You can eat those foods less in fat. You can eat those foods that are less in sodium. It just takes one decision to start a lifetime of a difference. And it's never too late to start, right? It's never too late to start. So you can only begin to change something if you take the first step. That's probably one of the most important things you can remember. Now, something else that I'm going to throw in here, right? Don't be a couch potato. Remember the exercise. I know at the beginning of the class, a lot of you said that you were actually increasing your exercise, and that's amazing. Keep that up. So no couch potatoes this week, okay? We want you all to try to aim for maybe 30 minutes each day. And you're probably thinking, when am I going to get time to do this? When do I have a free 30 minutes? I don't know about you, but I don't have a lot of free time. Think about this, doing household things is also going to count for that 30 minutes. So gardening, cleaning, walking around and picking up your kids' toys off the floor. If you're having to walking up down the stairs to do that, those things can get your heart going. So those can count for exercise. Something to kind of help yourself. I know a lot of people, they like to use fitness trackers to keep up with their activity, but if you don't have one of those, that's fine. Keep like a little journal, right? So write down August 19th, 10-minute walk. That's a good way. If you open that journal, you can kind of see, oh, I haven't exercised since Monday. I should probably get on that. So even if you don't have a fancy fitness tracker, you can still find ways to help hold yourself accountable. All right. So I do want to thank you all for listening. Oh, wait, I missed something else. Store brands are a good way to get herbs and spices at a cheaper price. Yes, absolutely. I almost always buy the store brand for things. And also check out your local farmers market for fresh herbs at a good price. Yes, I think that things made with fresh herbs taste 10 times better, right? But sometimes those can be hard to find fresh, like at your big chain stores. But those herbs and spices, a lot of them are grown locally. So check out your farmers market to try and buy those. Or grow your own. Yeah, so like even if you live somewhere where it's cold all the time, right? You can still grow your own like in a windowsill. It's pretty easy to do. I know I taught a class on herb, like starting an herb garden once, and our ag agent, Philip, he actually gave me the recommendation whenever you're starting out an herb garden, like if you're starting it in the winter, right? And you're trying to keep it indoors and you want to put it, by the window during the day so it can get some sun. But if you really want to help those seeds take off, he actually told me to put them on top of the refrigerator. And at first I thought that was so strange, right? But it's because there's heat that comes off your refrigerator. So as long as you're putting like those plants by your window or those seeds, during the day, they're going to get the sunlight. And then putting them on top of your refrigerator is going to help them get some of that heat. So that's a really weird tip that he gave me, but it worked. It did. It really did work. Okay, so I want to thank you all for paying attention. I know I'm almost at my hour here. Does anybody have any last minute questions? I do have one more thing left here on the presentation. Just like last week, I'm going to show you all a diabetes-friendly plated up recipe that we have, and it's actually pretty good, and it's going to use some of that squash that it seems like everyone has too much of right now. But if anyone has any questions, go ahead, post those. I'll try to answer them the best I can. We've had some good ones today. All right. I'll make sure to watch for that. But this is actually zucchini, right? So you're probably like, well, what the heck is zucchini? So before we kind of look at this recipe here, I'll actually show you what it looks like. It looks like this. So it's diabetes friendly, it's low carb, and it's gluten-free, right? So it's great in multiple regards. So it's got some ricotta cheese, some Parmesan cheese, a large egg, some garlic, spinach, Italian seasoning, salt to taste, black pepper, zucchini, and it actually uses 4 medium zucchini. So if you've got too much zucchini, this would be a great way to use some up. Marinara sauce and mozzarella. And it pretty much just makes like a little Italian dish, right? So I sent this PowerPoint out to you all yesterday. So everyone should have this recipe. But pretty much you're just going to combine all your ingredients, right? You're going to cover your zucchini once it's chopped up, and you're going to bake it at 350. That's, the overall gist. I won't read the whole thing to you. But I have actually tried this one, and it's pretty good. It is pretty good. But yeah, there's that. And then once again, there's the picture of it. So just like last week, this week is no different. We're going to encourage you to set a goal and try to work towards that, right? Make sure it's a SMART goal. You want it to be specific. So you want your goal to say exactly what you want to do. You want it to be measurable, right? Don't just say, I want to exercise more. Say, I want to exercise 10 minutes more per day. So put a number to it, right? It needs to be attainable. If, for example, you don't exercise a lot, but you want to exercise, you probably shouldn't make your goal, I want to run a 4-hour marathon by the end of the week. That's unattainable, right? That's not reasonable. Relevant. So don't make a goal if it's not something you care about. If you don't care about running a marathon, don't make your goal to run one, right? It's not, you're not going to stick to it because you don't care. And make it timely. So give yourself a date. So like, let's say I'm going to work up to a 5K or walking a 5K, for example, by the end of October, October 31st, right? So yeah, put a timestamp on it. Looks really good. Thanks. Yeah, Joe, I'd highly recommend trying that zucchini. I know it has a weird name, but it's really good, I promise. It looks good at least. It's making me hungry. Okay, so that's actually all I've got for this week. So at this time, I am going to go ahead and stop the recording. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and I hope to see you again next week with Olivia.